I'm looking around the room. I don't think we have any kids in here, and that's a good thing. Today's message is definitely PG-13, so I was going to say, if there are, young kids in the room, just parents, please be sensitive to that, because one thing I'll say about that is, if we don't talk, because today's, the topic for today is intimacy. We're in our last part of this series, part 4 on relationships and romance, and today we're going to talk about intimacy, what is that and all that, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty, a little bit. Yeah. And, the thing is, if we don't talk about that at church, then people are going to kind of get that information elsewhere. And a lot of the information out there is put on from Hollywood and from the world and from somebody online, or just, trying to figure it out on your own. And I feel like it's super important that we talk about these, things in church, so that we know what is a godly perspective on some of these things. Yeah. Right. It's interesting because church, when you're pastoring a church, you talk about so many different topics. We could be talking about, what is the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and be talking about that one week, to talking about faith and prayer and healing and finances, and now we're talking about marriage. And so it's not like we're always on the same thing. And if you're new here, don't worry, we don't always talk about relationships and romance. We talk about a whole bunch of different things, but we try to do we've been, over the last year or two, just been trying to do things in a series, where we'll do a series and we'll really dive deep into some different issues, or dive deep into different issues. And so we try to do that just to be, get a clear picture on everything. So this is, again, our last part in this series. And at the end of today's message, we're going to pray for everyone that wants prayer. Married couples, or if you're single and you want to get married, we want to lay hands on you and pray for you if you're interested or want that. No one has to, but that's what we're going to do today at the end of the message. You wanted to say something?
No, I just want to say, all right, let's talk about sex, baby.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. So she's just going right for it.
I've been holding that in. I've been waiting. No. So I'm excited though to talk about intimacy, to talk about that. And it's funny because, we did this series a few years ago when we were at our different location. And it's funny now to see how our marriage has grown and developed. And you feel like when you're newly married or before you're married, you're kind of oh gosh, does it get better? You don't understand when people are saying it's a different kind of love, and you're oh gosh. So, but for us, honestly, I would never trade going back to being newly married to what we have now. The love is so much stronger, the commitment, the faith, the strength that's grown in our marriage. And so it's actually super fun to now, years later, doing this series, knowing the depth that's grown in our marriage. And I wouldn't trade our marriage now for anything else, because I'm so much happier now and feel like we're so much more of a team and in a united front than we were when we started. So
yeah, you have to work out through a lot of the details of getting to know each other and becoming one entity together.
Yeah.
So at the first Gospel Guys Night, I started off the night by asking, guys, do you want to have more sex with your wife? And that's how I started. And we just had Gospel Guys this last week as well, this past Monday, which was awesome. But today's kind of going to be a 2.0 message of that first Gospel Guys Night, of that question, if you want to, you want to get down to business more often, then this will help. So this is kind of going to be some along those kind of lines, all right? So brace yourselves for it. If you're not married, this will be a sneak peek a little bit.
Yeah.
But, okay, so let's talk about what intimacy is, and let's talk about what intimacy isn't. And despite kind of the kind of what we're playing up to, or what we're kind of joking around about, is intimacy is not sex. Okay, that's number one. We're going to put that down right here. Intimacy is not sex. You see, you can pay for one of those things. You can't pay for the other thing. Right? You can pay for sex if you're really desperate, and if it's legal in your state or country or
not
whatever.
legal.
Or if it's not legal, I'm sure you could probably find someone willing. You can't pay for intimacy.
Right.
You see, there's a difference there. And so that's something that we have to distinguish, because I think what our culture does and what the world does is they try to make it seem like intimacy is sex. If you want to get intimate with someone, then that means you're having sex. And that's not true. Because obviously, that's an extreme example I gave, and it's kind of just like to make sure everyone's all awake this morning. But, in that kind of scenario, there's no intimacy there. You don't know that person. Like, it's just whatever. And, whether it's, just somebody that you're hooking up with or whatever the case is, that is not intimacy. That's just, two people fulfilling their biological design to procreate. There is no intimacy involved there. Mm-hmm. And so,
sorry, and to add to that, I feel like when you're newly married or before you get married, you have this misconception that you think, oh, the sex is like, it's all about the sex. Like, it's just sex. I know I'm saying that a lot in church, but
we'll get it all out in this message because, we don't have the kids in the room here, and, we're probably not going to be
I mean, when we were having these conversations around our children, we're like, the S word, so
yeah, I'm like, hey, Zara, can you leave the room? We're planning our Sunday sermon. Normally, we don't have to ask that.
Right. She's like, oh, okay. But what I was getting at is that, you think that that's what marriage and everything is about when you're going to get married. But the reality is that after being married for so much longer, that depth, what I was talking about before, it's that I crave so much more the intimacy, that closeness that you feel with your spouse than you do with just like that physical, satisfaction that you need to fulfill when you're married. So.
Right. And something else that the culture puts a bigger emphasis on is they put the emphasis on attraction instead of attachment. Yeah. And that's kind of something I want to talk about in a minute. Mm-hmm. Is like our culture has this huge kind of like thing where it's like and it's in all Hollywood, it's everywhere, where it's just this thing like if I'm attracted to this person and I'm getting like all these feelings, then it's like, well, maybe they're the right one for me and all this. And really there's so many more important things to be looking for in someone in a marriage. And we talked about that earlier in the series about it's not just about being attracted to a person. But I think if I could take just a moment to get a little bit nerdy and talk scientifically about what attraction actually is. Like, attraction is a bunch of chemical effects that take place in your brain as a result of hormones. Mm-hmm. It's what it really comes down to. There's 3 hormones primarily that deal with this. There's dopamine, serotonin, and I have to look. Norepinephrine.
Right.
Norepinephrine. Norwal. Okay.
Norwal.
I'd get it there eventually. Yeah. It's like a weird word when you look at it. Norepinephrine. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so those are 3 different, chemicals in our brains or hormones that affect us and they cause certain things. So if you don't know real quick, dopamine is heavily to do with rewards and motivation. Serotonin has to do with happiness, and norepinephrine is restlessness. Okay. And so when you meet someone, like let's say it's your first date and you're just like, the stars aligned and everything's just perfect and like you're just, it's all bliss and wonderful and you're just like, this is the one for me. You just have to take a step back. Like when I do like premarital counseling, I'm like, hey, have you guys ever gotten into an argument? Like, it's one of the questions I like to ask, because if they haven't, I'm like, you might want to just go find something to argue about, because like,
what comes out.
when all those, hormones are going and stuff, and it's just like everything is just la-di-da, and it doesn't, you can only see the good, the good in the person, like, right. That's great, but long term, there's probably going to be an argument, and you want to kind of see that person knowing, like, am I about to marry the Hulk? Like, when all of a sudden they get mad, they, like, rage mode into, right. like, a monster, or is it like, are they gonna calm down, yeah. or like, whatever, yeah. you want to know that. And so, but understanding that, like, I can have an attraction to, and this happens to people all the time. So like, in a bad way, because, and like, let's say you're at the workplace and maybe things have, there's been some tension at home or in your relationship or whatever, and you're at work and all of a sudden you're getting attention from this person, and next thing you know, you're like, well, I'm attracted to that person and my spouse, they're not really, I don't really think they're treating me like I should. And next mm-hmm. thing you know, your mind is kind of like headed down a dark path.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that just because you're attracted to that person does not mean that is a route that you should go down. Your right. brain literally has these chemical things taking place, and it's the way that God created us to be. These aren't bad things, but also in our culture and in what we deal with in this day and age with our technology especially, like these chemical reactions can almost get really screwed up. where, again, PG-13 warned you, maybe I should say rated R, I don't know, but like, pornography is a thing where like people, it's shocking the number of people that are watching or into pornography. Statistics say that it's 60% of people. Wow. And it used to be like this kind of like thought process where it's just like a thing for guys. Guys struggle with this and girls don't. Not anymore. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, it's common between both men and women. And what people may not realize, like sometimes Christians are like, we blame everything on the devil. And granted, the devil's no good, and he's probably the dude that kind of created the thought process behind all that. But sometimes people are like, oh, I need to have a demon cast out of me because I have this bad habit I can't deal with. Mm-hmm. Really, what a lot of times and I'm not downplaying that, because sometimes that might actually be the case, but a lot of times this is like a chemical thing that your brain, whether it's, okay, so there's pornography, but dopamine is also the same chemical that affects us with drug addiction. Mm-hmm. Your brain develops, it's called, and again, I said I'm getting a little bit nerdy, but neuroplasticity is where your your neural pathways wire to whatever you're putting into them. And in our culture, where you have an abundance of even from fast food that before 100 years ago didn't exist, like the high processed sugar, high processed oily fatty foods, and then pornography is just sexual junk food. It's all that stuff, your brain is getting extra levels, let's call it non-natural levels of dopamine in your brain, and it's so easy to get hooked on that stuff. And same thing with drug addiction. It's a non-natural kind of high that you're experiencing, and the more they make these drugs sophisticated, and from the heroin epidemic to everything going on with that, we live in a culture where these chemical imbalances play a huge effect. And trust me, I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, so I get the spiritual side of things, but also sometimes people will downplay just the natural way that our brain is wired and the way that things affect us. And so even in this area of attraction, you can get attracted to someone on a computer screen, but that is not real. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right. But and it's always the next thing. It's always you fulfill that satisfaction the first time, and maybe it's really not hardcore, but as you're going down, it's always what's the next freaky, crazy, scary, psycho thing that you're watching, and it's because your brain is so hooked on that drug to see it get worse and worse each time. Because
your brain essentially craves novelty in that kind of thing. It wants something new, and after, you've looked at this, then you want something more and more, and it ends up being this thing where your brain is kind of controlling things, and you're craving things, and you end up being what in the world? Yeah. Where did all this come from? It's no different with drug addiction. Right. It's no different with any of these addictions. So we have to understand that as spiritual as some of these things are, and we're happy to pray for people and deal with that, but also we have to understand that these things are a neurological thing in our brain, and if we allow that into our lives, I grew up going to public school, and high school dudes, they think it's no big deal to look at porn. This is just what we do or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you got little, 3rd, 4th graders on the school bus with pornography. And today in our culture where everyone has a phone or an iPad or whatever.
Oh, you wouldn't believe the amount of people that tell me they let their kids go to sleepovers, and that was their first time that they were exposed to things. Sure. That it's oh my gosh, you think you know people, you do not know people.
Yeah. Yep. And so you have to be so careful with your kids, to what you're saying. Yeah. But anyway, that happens, and then people in high school, they would think well, this is just me taking care of my needs. Self-love, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Baloney. That totally is going to play into any future relationship. If you're married, that is going to affect your marriage. It's going to affect the way that you look at your spouse and perceive your spouse, the way that it affects the whole sexual climate of your marriage. And so, sometimes even married couples can think that they can do that together. I've heard of that happening, where it's hey, we'll watch this together, and they make it a thing where hey, as long as we're doing this together, it's okay. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Yeah. Because all of that is going to mess up your brain, and it's going to affect the way that because ultimately you want you and your spouse to have a happy, healthy marriage. Right. And if you're, bringing images of everybody else into the bedroom with you, your brain is messed up. Yeah. And you're not gonna, again, you won't be attracted to your spouse because you're so focused on like the novelty of being able to click through 1,000 images or watch videos of whatever that like normal sex just doesn't do it anymore. And so this is like, honestly, this isn't like, knowledge that like I came up with. This is just basic statistics. You can,
Studies,
people
yeah.
do research, universities do research on all this stuff, and I've read about it. And, so it's just, that's something that's happening in our culture. And if we want to be intimate in our relationship, in our marriage, then we got to make sure it's her and me. Now I'm jumping way ahead of myself, but part of intimacy is exclusivity. Yeah. You can't be intimate with other people, like, if they're bringing other people into the relationship.
Yeah.
So
monogamy is not one at a time. It's one for life. Do you know what I mean? Like, one at a time. No, it's not. It's like, it's one for life. It's your spouse forever. So.
Back when spirit animals became a thing, people would ask me what my spirit animal was, and I would always say it's a beaver, because they look so innocent, and yet they can cause destruction, like, like destroyed acres of land. Anyway, that's what I used to say. But what's cool about beavers is they are monogamous. They mate for life.
Okay.
I mean, it's, I kind of knew I was onto something even back then as a teenager.
Yeah. As a teen.
So,
right.
I'm a one-woman kind of guy.
Yeah. And I mean, because I was so exposed to the world, or grew up like not in I grew up Catholic, so for me, there was a different perspective of sex. My mom and parents were very open with me, which was great, and they talked to me about that stuff, but they also, their rule at the house was like, okay, you can't have sex till you're 18. So for me, that was the standard for what was set in my home. It wasn't like you're waiting till you're married. And I think a lot of parents felt like, well, with their kids, because they fell short, they weren't able to tell their kids that they should wait till marriage because they had sex. Like my mom had me out of before she was married. So she felt like she couldn't have that standard for me. But I think that understanding, if I would have been explained how God created it and what the purpose was for it, that I would have understood. Like I would have been like, okay, like I get that maybe you fell short, but raise the bar for me in the way that God has it intended to be. So.
Sure. Intimacy takes time. We're talking a little bit about what intimacy isn't, but to talk about what intimacy is, intimacy takes time. Like, in a relationship, you got a lot going on, like on a day-to-day basis, if you have kids, especially careers, jobs, everything. And, sometimes like you want to just kind of like, you might not, we were talking about this last night. Okay, this week has just been a little bit like all over the place for us. We had a lot going on for the church, but then we had like both of our kids were sick off and on, and it was just like, we're talking about intimacy last night, and I was like, I think I said something to the effect of like, I just don't feel very intimate right now, and it's and Julia's like, that's a great point, because there's times where you just don't feel intimate because like it's not something that you can really just turn off and on. It's something that you have to like build up and work towards. Like where, you start off like where it's something where Julia and I like throughout the day or throughout the week that we're kind of like, constantly, whether it's complimenting each other or, being
on the same team with the kids, everything. Just like, I think that realizing, when you're newly married or something, you think, I get the question a lot, like, how often are we supposed to have sex? How many times a week is it supposed to be? But the reality is that like, if you're trying to meet a quota all of the time, you could be totally missing the intimacy level. You could be like, I'm just fulfilling what we agreed upon. That's like, 3 or 4 times a week. You know what I mean? But that's not where that is. It's about being on the same page and being intimate with your spouse, and knowing that like that's a good indicator to know where the level of your marriage is when you feel that intimacy, and how easy flowing does it feel that like you could do that, or it feels like I don't want anything to do with that, and like why is that? Where is the hold up on that?
So let's look at a Bible example of or a Bible definition of what intimacy is. Go with me to Genesis chapter 2. And this is actually a passage that Jesus referenced. He didn't reference this specific verse that we're about to read. He referenced verse 24, but we're going to read chapter 2, verse 25. This is what intimacy is. It says, the man and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. Mm-hmm. Say no shame.
No shame.
Okay, so that's what intimacy is that when a man and a wife can be together in a completely vulnerable state and feel no shame in front of each other. And that's not just physical, okay, that's not just like what we're looking at, but it's also mental and emotional. So that she's feeling like, I'm supporting her. I feel like she's supporting me, that we're on the same team. Because if it was all just about like physical and attraction and stuff, like, okay, what about in 60 years from now? Things are going to look different, okay? That's just what happens, right? So, so it goes, yes, of course, there shouldn't be any sort of shame or judgment in the physical, like, looks department or whatever. We're all people. God created us this way. Some of us are bigger, taller, shorter, smaller, whatever. Some of us have a longer nose or bigger ears or whatever the case. There's no shame. Like, and Hollywood puts all this emphasis on, like, you gotta have, like, this look in order to be, like, performing well or any of that nonsense. It's all just a joke. Like, that is not at all intimacy, and that's not at all where, like, a good marriage comes from. It's not based on, like, how shredded my six-pack is right now. I'll be honest, guys, I got a one-pack, okay? I used to have a six-pack. It's slowly morphed into just one ab, okay? I would love to, like, if they just separated again back into six, but I just right now don't have time for that. So maybe one day, I mean, hey, I'd love that, but like, but
I won't hold my breath though.
Right, but hey,
I love you either way.
Hurtful.
I love you either way, so I'm not dependent on that,
Right, so. And that's the point. Is like, we shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a looks thing, but like, okay, but so much more about what intimacy is beyond just the looks is about her and I connecting and being on the same page. So that, and that's what takes time. That takes, like, when I went to Bible school, the dean, I think, of our Bible school would say, sex starts in the kitchen. Where it's like, you're complimenting each other. You're like, helping each other. You're being nice to each other. You're helping each other, taking care of the kids. And then, like,
I love when you, like, compliment me in front of the kids, and the kids are like, oh.
I do this thing where now we're like, Hagen gets super jealous when, he's a year and a half. So, like, we'll go to each other and be like,
give a kiss.
And he looks at us both, and then he, like, starts reaching in for a kiss. He, like, tries to get, like, right in between us.
What is this? Yeah.
So it's so cute.
Yeah.
But, and whatever, in your marriage, you find, like, the things that you guys like and whatever. It's just important that you have those things that you're sharing with and connecting on. So. Yeah. We'll come back to kind of this topic about, like, intimacy taking time. Intimacy is needed if you want to have a happy and healthy marriage. You have to have intimacy. It can't just be like, hey, we need to have sex so that we can make kids, or we need to have sex so that we can have a good marriage. I heard this, like, as a teenager into my young adult years, I used to hear, like, preachers say that, like, sex is the glue that holds marriage together. I don't believe that, actually. Not at all. Like, there was always this emphasis on, like, you have to have sex and that's what holds the marriage together.
Right.
Well, if your marriage is kind of, like, on the rocks, then there's probably not much sex happening.
Right.
So how is sex going to be the thing that holds you guys together? What holds you together is me and her spending time together, communicating with each other, figuring out what is she like, what is he like, love languages, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But those are the things you have to learn how to cultivate intimacy. It's not just, hey, let's get intimate, let's go to the bedroom. Like, that's not going to happen.
It doesn't fix the problem.
It doesn't.
Right? Yeah.
So as important as sex is, and we'll, like, you want to have an active sex life when you're married, but, like, there's so much more important things that go into making that happen than just being like, okay, well, we're married, so we got to fulfill our duties or whatever. So, so let's go up a verse to verse 24. This is actually the verse that Jesus quoted, and it says, "For this reason, man will leave his father and mother and be united united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." I mentioned this a moment ago. Intimacy requires exclusivity. And one of the biggest relationships that tries to come into our marriage relationship is our parents. Guys, girls, don't bring your parents to the bedroom with you. Let's just, like, okay, let's just close the door. Marriage bedroom is me and my wife. And honestly, like, even just in our marriage in general, like, my parents did things a certain way. A lot of good stuff that I learned from them, maybe some things that I want to avoid. Same thing for Julia and her family. And so we have to understand that, like, when we get married, we have to become our own organization.
Yeah.
Okay? We have to figure out what works for us.
Right. Let's talk turkey. Right?
Right. And we do.
Yeah.
We do have to talk turkey. And we figure out, like, okay, like, maybe we did this, you did this growing up, or you saw this growing up. But is that how we want to do things in our family? The way that you talk to each other, the way that you do things. The mom took care of the kids, or the dad took care of the kids. The Mom worked, the dad, all these things are things that you have to work out. And you can't like just do strictly what you saw your parents do. And so, maybe your parents weren't the most, I don't know, maybe they didn't put a lot of emotion on display or affection on display, but maybe that's something that your spouse really craves. Well, you got to work with each other, and you might have to realize, like, take a moment and be like, why am I this way? And be like, okay, maybe it's because of the way that I was brought up. I'm just kind of wired this way. This is something that I got to work on, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of like have to do that. So, marriage, intimacy requires exclusivity. So Julie and I, we got to have time where we're on our own. Like, and we got into this last week about how it's easy when you have kids for them to just like kind of consume your whole schedule. You have to find time where it's her and me.
Yeah.
He and me, he and her, she and him,
Yeah,
whatever,
careful.
it's got to be like you and me. We
Right.
have to find time where we can spend and talk about things, get on the same page with things, just like, even if it's just like dreaming together, planning together, talking about what's happened, the future, whatever it is, you have to get that time together and have that, because that's what's going to build romance. Hollywood puts all this out there as far as what builds romance, like my
Right.
shredded hot bod. Not it.
Rose petals everywhere.
Right.
You know.
I mean, you just end up having to sweep them all up, which,
Right.
hey, if you do that, I'm not judging you. It's fine. It's cute, whatever. But like, I mean, in the end, like, you can put a million rose petals and like, that's not going to just create intimacy in your marriage, right?
Yeah.
So intimacy comes from access, physical, emotional, and mental. Adam and Eve, they were naked and unashamed. They had no shame. There was no judgment. And it wasn't just physically, it was mentally as well. They were there connecting emotionally with one another. I mentioned earlier, love languages. And we talked about this at our first guys' night. This is something that really is the duty of every spouse, is to figure out what your spouse's love language is. And there's
how they receive love,
Sure.
what makes them feel like fulfilled, because we learned early on, like, he might be buying me gifts, and I think that that's my love language, but I still feel so disconnected from him. And it's like, why is that? And it's because later realizing my actual love language is quality time, is spending time together where you know me, I know you, and we know each other different than anybody else would know each other. So really nailing that down. And I think that takes time also for you to know you, but sometimes you'll say like, I know you better than you know yourself,
Yeah.
but that's really what, when we're saying love languages, for those that maybe that don't know that it's like, how does your spouse receive love? And maybe you give love naturally in a different way. Like maybe it's easy for you to do acts of service. Like Jeremiah, he's a great cook. And so he would feel like, I made this great meal. And, and I'd be like, great, I can also get a great meal from Wegmans, so, but understanding,
Whoa.
I know,
Hold on.
it's totally different.
All
It's
right.
totally different.
Hold on.
I appreciate all of your cooking and everything. I'm always bragging about you.
You can get a meal at Wegmans. Let's
Right.
not add the great part.
Yeah, right. Okay. No, but what I'm saying is that for me, I feel more connected and receiving love from him when we actually spend time together. So even if it's a quick check-in or whatever, but that's for me. And so I have to understand then, how does he receive love? Maybe might be the way that I want to give it is different than the way that he would receive it.
Yeah. So there's a great book on that. I say great. I shouldn't say great because I haven't read it in like 10 years. I read it when I was in Bible college, but it's called The 5 Love Languages. I have to be careful with book recommendations because once like I gave a married couple a book that was given to me, like married couple advice and stuff, and then like there was some quirky stuff in there that wasn't okay. So
You're like,
anyway,
no, oh no.
but
We didn't
like
get to that chapter.
that's where I at least learned like about the 5 love languages. I know you had to read it too, and so help me out. There's physical touch. There's
acts of service,
words of affirmation,
quality time, and
receiving of gifts. Those are like the 5 that it talks about. And even if you just remember those things and you don't read the book, take time to figure out what is it that my spouse actually likes. And then you have to understand that like, just like me, like when I put my heart and soul into this meal that I just cooked for my wife, and that's like, when they say love is like the key ingredient in your food, like that's me, like I'm putting my heart and soul into that meal, and she'll eat it, and like it makes me super happy, like when she like licks the plate or whatever.
Like, oh my gosh.
But like ultimately for her, like that's not. She's just like, okay, now now let's sit on the couch and talk, for like 9 hours or whatever,
Right.
you know?
At least, yeah.
Right. So we just have to understand our love languages, and figure, you have to
can feel like you're not on the same page for so long. You feel like, why is there such a miscommunication? Why is there we just cannot get each other? And I think that you're doing things in opposite directions, and you're not understanding really what makes the other person tick. You think that they're the same as you, but they're not.
So like you mentioned with you used to tell me like giving of gifts was your big love language.
Yeah.
And so that would be like my go-to fix if I ever needed to like spruce things up or fix something that I messed up, you know, like, oh, gift, you know, but come to find out it was actually quality time, you know? So like this past Christmas for Julia's gift, like her main gift that I got her was actually like a hotel stay where it was just her and I, and we spent basically 2 days just talking and spending time to, you know, they had a hot tub and all kinds of stuff, you know, it's just like great, you know, so I knew that like she's going to receive that way better than a new pair of earrings.
Right.
Like,
it was the best gift ever. Cause I mean, the year before he got me like a pearl necklace, which I had said that I wanted, but then it's like, it almost, and it's okay to evolve. It's okay that like when you're newly married, maybe you,
we don't believe in evolution here.
Well, it's okay that maybe in the beginning you feel one way of your love language, but that then it can change, that you can say like, okay, maybe I am different now, and maybe what I thought was making me feel loved, actually that isn't the case, you know. I think I just got really good at shopping, so I was like, how much did you pay for this? I could have got it on sale, you know, so I think but I had to let that go. So when he does get me gifts now, I still appreciate it, but as far as like for me, it's like, you know, you want to fill the love tank, it's like, we're going to the lake house, you know.
Right.
Oma, watch the kids. Put them in the car. So, yeah.
So I've been trying to get to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, like every Sunday message in this series, because it's so great. Like, and it talks about love. Don't turn your Bibles there. We're not going there. We actually don't have time. I'm so sorry. Just homework for this series. Read 1 Corinthians 13. The verses on love. If you have an amplified translation, read it in that, or if you don't, like look it up online.
If you're having marriage problems, it's great to read that almost every morning. Read it every morning, because then it gets you in that perspective of what love should look like from your end, because you're only held accountable for you. You can only change you. So you knowing how to love somebody, you know, and the Bible does not return void. If you give love like that to your spouse, you will eventually, it will begin to change, and you'll start receiving that back.
Yeah.
Unless they're a devil. And they're not wanting to change whatsoever. But I know it's so true. When I started loving him more in the way that he would receive love, he started changing too in the things that I wanted. So it's completely the way that it works in our marriage. You will never fail by treating your spouse like gold. You'll never fall short when you love them the way that God intended to have love really created. It'll always come back to you.
Yeah, and so 1 Corinthians 13 with love, it's actually not written to like married couples or anything. It's expounding on Jesus' love to love each other as I have loved you. But it all applies within a marriage, you know, and so it's that line that preacher said, the race to the back of the line, putting the other person ahead of you. And we've talked about that in this series. But so lastly, let's talk about the fruit of intimacy. The reason we don't have time is I want to pray for people this morning, or we want to pray for people, and so we want to have time for that at the end here. So the fruit of intimacy is a close bond together, and that's really what creates intimacy. And even in the physical side of things, like when her and I are on the same page and we've spent that time filling each other's, as they call it, the love tank, like you got to fill that tank, you know, like she's done for me what makes me feel super loved, and I've done for her what she feels loved. And when we do that, then like, okay, this is where we're getting like, you know, in the details, like that's when like sex is the best. Like, because like you can just have sex, whatever, like with, I guess, you know, I'm trying to be careful about what I'm saying here. I was going to say with anyone, but we don't want to go there.
No, right.
But it will not be the same as when you're married and you've built this trust between each other and this close bond of where I've been vulnerable with her and I've shared some things with her where like I'm not normally comfortable talking about these things, and vice versa, and we can like really get to know each other, who we are. Those are the times where it's not always like, you know, it's not just about what I do for you or those types of things, but it's about the connection, the bond, the trust, the vulnerability that we've built up is what really creates intimacy.
Like you were saying before, it's that unashamed feeling. It's that feeling like, where that your partner has your back, that they have you 100%, that there isn't feelings of like, oh, well, let's turn the lights off, or, oh, let's just get this done and quick and over with, or, oh, I'm fulfilling a need. It's like you feel unashamed, you feel totally comfortable. And that's the difference, is that, like we're saying, in the world, or if you're having sex outside of what God created, because you can even still be in a marriage and not have that intimacy, but you're just fulfilling that sexual need or whatever. But it's really that, do you feel unashamed naked in front of your spouse? Do you feel like that they love you, that they accept you for exactly who you are when you are completely bare? And that's the way our relationship should be with the Lord, is that when we are unashamed before God, no matter what, we're not hiding anything, we're not closing anything off, that we are unashamed before God in our actions and what we do. And so that's where when it's with your spouse, though, that you should feel completely unashamed. There's no guilt. It's just you're totally stripped down to who you are, and you feel totally comfortable with that person. Yep.
So we're going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 7 real quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3 and 4. It says, the husband should fulfill his marital duty. Now, does anyone have a King James version here? King James is kind of funny. Does it say conjugal rights?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like... Oh, maybe... Okay, not King James then. What was that version I was reading last night? I don't know. It might have been American Standard. Whatever. I read a version and it's like conjugal rights. I'm like, what is this, prison?
Yeah,
like,
right. You do not want to feel like that in your marriage.
Yeah, some things they did better in these more modern translations. Yeah. So, all right. So anyway, sorry. A side note. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to the wife. Do not deprive each other, except but by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. And so, Paul here writing to married people, and he's telling them like, hey, when you get married, it's no longer like you can give your spouse the treatment of like, oh, well, and honestly, like this whole thing about intimacy kind of solves all of that, where it's like when you guys are feeling intimate together and you've been building that trust and vulnerability between each other, it's not like you're going to have to like beg for sex. It's going to be natural, but we do need to talk about this briefly, because you hear about sometimes where it's like the husband or the wife will kind of withhold themselves until they kind of get what they want in their relationship. Well, you're not going to get it until, you do X, Y, and Z for me. So we have to understand that that's not a Christian, that's not found in a Christian marriage. In a Christian marriage, it's a mutual love and affection for each other. And let me say this, it should be mutual satisfaction for each other. Yeah. All right. And I'm going to be detailed here. Guys, that means slow down. Mm-hmm. And girls, that means speed up, right? Like, it's one of those things where you kind of gotta like, have some leeway both ways. The guys, we're just like, we don't really need time to get ready. We're 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds, Mm-hmm. The ladies are more like a diesel engine. They gotta warm up, give them time, so,
right.
We gotta have some, some understanding here. So, like, guys, like, the moment your wife might give you a hint, like, hey, later tonight, it's like, that doesn't mean, like, take all your clothes off right now. That might mean, like, she's just like, hey, let's start,
like she's getting changed. Like, she's getting changed. She's not, like, trying to get you in the bed.
Right. So, take your time. Like I said, sex starts in the kitchen, like, earlier in the day, like, start complimenting each other, or in the, it's like, this process that you're throughout the day, throughout the week, you text her, like, I love you so much, you look beautiful, whatever it is, like, do the things that she loves. If it's words of affirmation, if it's like, if you doing the laundry gets your wife turned on, then hey, whatever, do 5 loads, whatever it takes,
loads, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, just, hey, you understand, guys, that for them, it's in order for it to feel good for both parties, you both have to be interested and want it. And so do what that takes. And that maybe it's physical touch, where giving your wife a massage is what's really just going to help her unwind, or taking an hour to talk about your day. And you're just like, I don't need an hour. I need literally whatever, 30 seconds. How long does it take to take this suit off? Whatever, sorry, you know what I mean? So that's where I'm saying, guys, you got to slow down.
Yeah.
Now, ladies, I understand that you have a lot to say. I get it, right?
Right.
But just go easy on your guy. There's the whole thing about quality time, but and this has sometimes happened between us. We'll just be very real here. I'll be very real here for a moment. It'll be 10:30 at night. I'm already had a long day. Hagen had me up at 5:30, whatever the case is. And, there's interest there, but then it's okay, now we gotta talk. And then it's 11:45 and I'm like, maybe tomorrow, she's just had the best time of her life because she got to talk the last hour and 45 minutes.
Right.
And I'm just man, I'm so tired.
So maybe pick about what specifically I'd want to talk about, not everything.
Right. So that's where I'm saying
less is more.
Ladies, you gotta speed it up, guys. You gotta slow it down. Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about. This is just some practical advice. It'll help things out, right? So, and when you do that and you put each other's needs ahead of your own, and you give the wife what she wants and you give your husband what he wants, you do that, then it's easy sex. Mm-hmm. There's no, the world might have their phrase for what easy sex might mean. You hear the term he or she's easy or whatever. Look, that's all nonsense. That's just Hollywood filling you with trash. That's not what easy sex is. Easy sex is after you've had the time put into loving one another, being there, supporting each other, then you'll have great sex. But until then,
it's fun as opposed to feeling like it's a duty or a job on both ends, Right. And like you were saying, I think that it's always important to know that the husband, you are always pursuing your wife. Just because you got married, it's not it's always a constant pursuing. But women also, I think we sometimes have a tendency not to forgive and to let go of things. I think guys, they can kind of maybe get over things quicker in the most case. But I think a lot of times we don't realize we have unforgiveness in our heart towards our spouse. And that's where there will be no intimacy. There will be no fun. It will not be free flowing, easy sex, like he's saying, if you can't learn to forgive and to, 1 Corinthians 13 says, keep no records of wrong.
Yeah, so good.
Keeping no records of wrong. And we both said we wanted to have a final thought. And that's, for me, what I would say is that you have to be able to be honest with yourself, take it to the Lord and say, do I have unforgiveness in any area for anything against my spouse? Because there will not be a happy home. There will not be a happy marriage. There will not be great intimacy, great sex. There will be none of that if there is levels of unforgiveness. You have to learn how to forgive quickly, because the Bible says to forgive 7 times. You know what I mean? To forgive. We have to constantly be forgiving if you want a loving, happy home.
Yeah, that's so good. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, are we going to be able to post this online? Is this okay to, should we share this? Or is this just yeah, you guys think that? Okay, all right.
Sarah's yes.
Whenever we post
yes.
Our sermons online, it asks you is this content appropriate for children? I'm nope.
No.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But so that's what we had to share. I want to recap just real quick what we've gotten into this series, and then I want to offer to pray for anyone that wants. So part 1 was marrying well. And if you weren't here for any of these messages, they'll all be online, so you can find them on our YouTube channel. But part 1 was marrying well. And what that meant was being the right person, not finding the right person. Too often when we think of marrying well, we think about finding the right person. Forget finding the right person. Be the right person. And then when you become who God has called you to be, and this is we say it's for marrying well, but it's also if you're married. If you're already married, stop trying to fix your spouse. Stop trying to get them to be who you want them to be. Start you focusing on you being the right person.
One thing to add to that was that the shift was that you think your marriage is going to solve all your problems, and that's not the case. If you go into life working on yourself, when you go into marriage, it stays the same because you know you're still a work in progress after you're married, and that you're constantly working on yourself and not looking to your spouse as on a pedestal or feeling like they're your savior and they're going to fix everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Newlyweds was part 2, and that was about your hopes, dreams, and desires. When you get into a relationship, you have your hopes, dreams, and desires of what you think she's going to wear to bed at night, what he's going to drive, where she's going to drive, all the different things like that you have, your hopes, dreams, and desires. And if we're not careful with our hopes, dreams, and desires, they become expectations, which really to your spouse feels like a debt to pay. Right. And so the Jesus answer for that is to love each other as he loved us. And the way that he loved us is that he laid down his life first. He decided, I'm going to put your needs ahead of my needs before I even consider what I'm getting out of this. I'm just going to lay my life down for you. Whether you receive him into your life or not as your Savior, he's already laid down that gift for you, and it's available for you. So that was part 2. And so love your spouse. Jesus went first. We go first. I know it can be scary to be like, what if I love the way that Jesus says to love and he or she isn't going to reciprocate that to me? You go first. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. All right. And then last week, part 3 was married with kids. Kids join your family as a blessing from God, but don't let your kids become more important than your marriage. Always make sure that your marriage is number one. And then, of course, today,
the best gift you can give your children is a good, happy, godly marriage. It's the best gift you can give them. It's not college. It's not like, the discipline. It's not the toys, all that. The best thing you can give your children is a good, happy home.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course today on intimacy. And so, I hope that you all enjoyed this series and got some things out of this, whether you're married, single, whatever, relationship status is, that you're in. We hope that this has been a blessing to you. Like I said, we want to pray for everyone that wants prayer. If you're a married couple or if you're a single and you want to be married, if you don't want prayer, that's totally fine. Before we do that, we're going to, receive an offering. If you want to invest in God's kingdom, we'll put instructions on the screen for you to do that. And again, we're so thankful for the continued generosity. I keep meaning to get the slide up on there, but we're going to put the slide up for like the people that have been contributing to the Gospel Co-op sponsorship. I want to say, if I do my math real quick, I want to say we're up to 4 students being sponsored already, that we have that available. So y'all have been for the next semester, if needed or whenever that happens to be. So everyone has just been so generous and we're thankful for that. And so one of the verses that I always like to quote is in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, where in the NIV 84 edition it says, God will make you rich in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And that's really our prayer for you all as a church, that God is blessing you, that God is providing for you and multiplying your resources so that you can continue to be generous, not just here at church, of course, that's part of it, but then being generous in your life in wherever you are. And so it's awesome. We love hearing testimonies of how generous everyone is in this church. You all are taking care of each other. I love it when people find out that so-and-so has a need, that they just go over and help them out. We love hearing that sort of thing. So in closing, we're going to pray, and we'll receive the offering, and then we'll pray for everyone that wants prayer. So Heavenly Father, we thank you that you give us seed for sowing, bread for eating. We thank you that you multiply our resources, that you make us rich in every way so that we can be generous on every occasion. We thank you that you are taking care of our finances, that as we seek first your kingdom, that you're making everything that we have need of available to us. That we seek first your kingdom, and all the things that we have need of are added unto us. And so, Father, we give you the praise, the glory, the credit for it. Father, I pray that this message that we've been sharing on marriage, that it produces fruit in the lives of every person that hears it, whether they're married or want to be married one day. Father, I thank you that your word is true, that it doesn't return back void, that it helps us, and that we can have a godly marriage, a happy, healthy home life, a happy, healthy marriage together with our spouses, and that if you're single, Father, that we can find the right spouse, or that we can become the right person so that the right person will find us. Father, we thank you. We thank you for the work that your Holy Spirit does on the inside of us to help us to become more and more like you. In Jesus' name. And if you believe it, say amen. Well, we'll set the offering basket down here. And if you have an offering to bring, you can bring it forward. I'm going to ask, if you're here and you would like prayer, I'm going to ask, just so that, I'm not confused, just quick story. One time, this was back at our old church a few years ago, I called this couple up front to pray for them. I thought they were a couple. It was actually like a brother and a sister-in-law. And I prayed Lord, I pray that you bless this couple and all that they're going to do and yada yada. And I'm praying over them. And I see this smirk on their face or whatever, but I'm just okay, whatever. They go and they sit down and later after the service, I come over, I'm talking to them and they're like, yeah, so this is my sister-in-law. And I'm I felt so bad. Yeah. So it'll help me if, I want to pray for every married couple. Yeah. So if you're married and you're here, love for you to come down to the front. If you want to come to this side, if you're single and you want prayer, come down to the front here. And we just want to pray over you. If you're watching this message online, thank you for being a part of the gospel online. We love you. We bless you. Have a great week. We'll see you again real soon.